Hello, 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 and hello, Heather. Welcome to Exhale with Regina. I am so happy to have you here. This is all about women owning their voices. Can you hear me okay?
I can, Regina. Thank you so much. It's so great to be with you this afternoon.
Yes, and it is so great to have you here. So before we get started, Heather, I just want to share with the guests and good hello, and I just really want to make sure that I invite all guests that if you have comments or questions for Heather, please make sure that you ask them. And because this is not only an interview for me and for Heather, but for the audience, for women who are ready to own their voices. And the whole purpose of Exhale with Regina, and I always ask Heather, the guest, to join in with me and ready to exhale. So on a count of three, let's exhale. One, two, three. Yes, that felt awesome. The whole purpose of Exhale with Regina is really about talking about women who are purposeful, who have discovered their voice, who talking about their challenges and adversities, not allowing societal norms, family expectations to define who they are. It is all about them walking in their purpose, owning their voices, and letting the community know who they are. And not only the community, but our families, right? And
Yeah.
everyone else. But first, it starts with us. And so that's the whole purpose of Exhale with Regina. I wanted to give the audience some insight uh, to your bio, which is very powerful. And we talked a little bit about the words for me that came out of your bio, but I want to read it to you guys. Heather Geisler was appointed Executive Vice President and Chief Marketing, Communication, and Experience Officer in 2020, which during the pandemic, she provides leadership for brand strategy and consumer experience by bringing global brand builder experience to this role. A gifted strategist and transformative leader, her skills and passion for consumer engagement position Henry Ford Health System to make an even greater impact on the communities it serves through a unified mission, unparalleled customer experience, and the innovative care for which Henry Ford is known. Most recently, Heather was Senior Vice President of Global Brands for Hyatt Hotels Corp. She was responsible for leading global marketing positions and growth of Hyatt's full and select service brands portfolio and led the development and execution of cross-functional strategies to drive revenue and targeted creative campaigns focused on engagement. In 2018, Hospitality Management magazine named her its 30 most influential women in hospitality. That's powerful. Prior to Hyatt, she was vice president of brand marketing at MSNBC, where she led the development of the TV cable channels, brand positioning, and growth strategy, including creating integrated consumer brand experience programs and award winning advertising campaigns. She also guided the development and promotion of the network's corporate social responsibility initiatives and sponsorships. She's also served nonprofit and corporate clients at New York City Marketing and Advertising Agency SS Plus K, including leading its effort in support of initiatives by former First Lady Michelle Obama. Snap, snap. Heather is a graduate of the University of Iowa and completed the Punch, is it Sulzberger?
Sulzberger.
Okay, Sulzberger Fellowship Program at Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism. She resides in the Bloomfield Village section of Bloomfield Hills with her husband, two children, and their labradoodle. She loves yoga, running, and discovering with her family the diverse tastes, sights, and experiences to be had in their new home state. Well, welcome to Michigan, too.
Thank you, Regina. It's so funny. I mean, because we moved a year ago in August, right? And so everything was shut down. So
Everything.
And I mean, I don't know about you, but I discover new places through my mouth. I love to eat. I love to try new restaurants. Like that's how I find a place, right? That's how I get literally the taste of a new home is through trying
Wow.
new restaurants and going to museums and getting out and walking neighborhoods. And so much of that just wasn't possible when we moved here. So this
Yeah.
summer has been a great summer for me and my family to really, enjoy everything that is Metro Detroit and, and beyond across Michigan. So it's been awesome.
Well, that is awesome. So tell me one place before I get into this question about your brand story. Tell me one place that has been exciting for you and your family to visit in Michigan.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, I think in Detroit, we're huge Eastern Market fans. And
Oh, yes.
yes, and I mean, again, that actually was a place that we started going to in the fall because it was outdoors, right? And they
Yes.
did a really good job of keeping the
Yes.
market open, even though you had to be masked, and they did a good job of trying to control access and entry. But like that was such a gem for us when we first found Eastern Market. I mean, we're early risers in our family, so we would wake
Okay.
up, get in the car, drive down there, shop from all the different vendors. We love the craft markets too. It's so great to see all of the creativity that comes out of kind of makers and the maker kind of culture here in Detroit. So that's been an awesome find for us.
Yes.
And then there's like just little places. So my husband is he's a middle school social studies teacher at
Oh,
Munger,
wow.
yeah, at Munger School in Detroit. And
Okay.
there's what he's discovered again in his neighborhood when he started going into school, once they were able to come back a little bit, is like there's these amazing taco trucks around the corner from Munger. And
Okay.
so he took us, me and my son, when we went to a Tigers game, and he was like, you got to come to the taco truck where he eats like every single day when he leaves school to go buy tacos for him and the other teachers. And so like
Wow.
we got to go to the taco truck. So that's what I love. I love like the little hole in the wall kind of neighborhood joints.
Me too.
Yeah. So send them my way because I'll add them to our list.
Okay.
That's how you really get to know a place. So
I
that's,
love that you said that. It was so
yeah.
funny because when my husband and I first start dating, a little, I guess about 6, 7 months, we went to visit his home. And we were walking around the museums and everything, and I saw this hole in a wall, and I was like, I want to go there.
Yeah.
I want to taste the burgers. And he was like, that's a hole in a wall. I mean, really? Are you kidding me? You want to? I said, they have the best food. He said, okay, I'm gonna try it, but this is something I normally don't do. So we sat down and it was so delicious. He was like, I learned something every time with you. The
Yeah.
simplest things, you don't need a whole lot. And that's what I'm hearing from you, just the
Yeah.
simplest things.
Oh my gosh, I think I'm the same way. The best, kind of, again, once I've been able to connect with my team and my coworkers, the best, restaurants or the best social experiences we've had is when we've gone to just places that are just places because they're social and that you're really
Yeah.
enjoying. There's no pretension. There's just, good food and good people and lots of
Yes.
laughs. And that's what I always gravitate to.
I love that. Well, one of the things that I shared with you is that there were 4 words that came to mind when I was reading through your bio was definitely journey, that you have been on this journey, and it's just awesome. The schooling that you had, the MSNBC, and I watch MSNBC, I watch it, okay? And then to see that you were with Hyatt Hotels, then from there, now we at Henry Ford system. You have been on this journey, transformative for sure, right?
Yeah.
Looking at connection. Yeah, when I say, and I said there was a 4th word. Evan, what was the other
Oh,
one?
it
There
was
was a,
empathy, I think.
yes, empathy.
Which makes me
Yes.
so happy that came through for you.
Yeah, so that did come through for me, particularly, and I'll get into that. But those 4 words, what does those 4 words mean to you, and how they've been applicable to your career and to your journey of just life?
Yeah, I actually feel really blessed, Regina, because not a lot of people do get to choose where you work, right? Like, let's be honest, like the ability to make strategic decisions and purpose-driven decisions in our employment is not something that everybody has, but it is something that I have had. And I've always tried very hard to pick and working where I worked and who I worked for and what I worked on with things that aligned with my values. Like, I always wanted to work at a place where I felt like I could make a difference. And in marketing, there's a lot of jobs in marketing that don't make a difference. Like, I would be very honest, like, I never had to sell toilet paper. Like, I never had to, you know what I mean? I didn't have to. I've always worked for brands or products that are connected to experiences that are meaningful for people. You know, when I worked at agencies, I worked on a lot of, you know, kind of purpose-driven causes and nonprofits in the public health space, or the work that I did with First Lady Michelle Obama was on her Let's Move campaign, right, which was really focused on getting young people active and exercising and eating better. You know, at MSNBC, it was about giving voice to communities. It was about talking about issues that were important to people. And the opportunity we had there was to build a community, again, people who felt like you weren't just watching, you know, cable news used to be you watch to find out what happened, right? You just want to watch and find out the news. Where we felt like there was a huge opportunity at MSNBC was to actually create a community of folks who had shared values, who had shared passions, who had shared concerns, and give voice to that community, right? So, and then at Hyatt, it was about hotels. And when you think about where hotels fit in people's lives, you connect in a hotel in so many meaningful ways, right? It's where you went on your honeymoon, potentially. It's where you went on a business trip that went great or maybe didn't go great. Like, amazing experiences. It's where you went for your family reunion, right? Amazing experiences happen at hotels. And so, and then when healthcare, of course, right? Healthcare, what happens in healthcare, you know, in settings literally is life and death, and it impacts people in that same way. So I think that you know, that is one of the things that I just feel so grateful for, is that I've always been able to work for brands or on issue campaigns or for organizations for whom making a difference was important. And it was like my through line all the time. When I was looking for the job and I took the job at Henry Ford, people said, you know, where do you want to work? Like, what place do you want to work? And I said, I don't really know where I want to work, but I know the type of work I want to do. And I wanted to do work that meant something to people, that connected people, that helped people be their best selves and connected to the values that were important to them.
That is awesome. And, you know, all through your conversation, you are talking about values. And I have really begun to believe that. I'm wondering, Heather, are people really connecting to their values? Like, it may be within us that we've gotten these values from our parents, you know, we gotten these values from maybe in the communities that we have worked in, but are we connecting with our values? And what I'm hearing you say is that it was value driven, not only purpose driven, but it was value driven. How did you begin to make that connection?
I think the most powerful work you can do is work that does give you some sort of emotional benefit, right? There are plenty of people who will work for a paycheck. And it is important, right? At the end of the day, you have bills to pay and we have things to do. But if you can do that and you get something out of it that connects in a more personal and meaningful level, that's the ultimate satisfaction, right? The reality is your professional life is time away from other things that are important to you. We make value judgments all the time about where we're going to spend our time, who we're going to spend our time with, right? And what does it do for us and what does it do for them? And so I've always been of the mindset, if I'm going to work and I'm going to make the commitment, and that's time away from my kids and time away from, you know, other things that are important to me, I want that to feel valuable. Like, I want that to something. It either needs to allow me to do something I couldn't do otherwise, or it needs to help me advance and at least at the end of the day feel like I'm a good person. And so I think that's at the most visceral level how it connects to your values, because in some ways your time is actually the thing that's how you spend your time is the ultimate expression of your values. The choices you make about where you go, what you do, and how you do it is the public
Yes.
expression of those values.
It really is. And, that reminds me too of a scripture in the Bible that really talks about where your heart is where your treasures are, right? So if you're not spending the time where you really want to spend it, then you have to look at what you're treasuring.
Yeah.
So it's not always a positive, it's not always positive
Right.
where people are spending their time, right?
Yeah.
But it's telling. It's
Yeah.
telling. Yeah. So I love the fact that you're saying that it had to your time and away from your family, how you were spending your time, what you value, all that was connected for you.
Yeah, it is. And again, I appreciate that that's a gift, right? The reality is not everybody has the privilege of being able to make the choices that I've been able to make in my career. But because I value it so much and because it is a gift, shame on me if I don't make the most of every opportunity that I have. And so that's where I feel like I have a real big sense of responsibility as an expression of those values to make sure how I show up is making a difference, not just for the organizations that I work for, but also for the people that I work with. And that's part of being a good leader too. And that's, I've had the great opportunity of having worked for a lot of very strong female bosses in my career. And I do think that's one of the things that I've taken from that is that ability too of saying, part of what you have as a gift when you're a leader is to be able to share the wealth. And sometimes that means, stepping aside and pushing other people forward. And so I think that there's that piece of it too, is how do you make the most of that experience that you've either chosen or found yourself in?
I love that. We have some comments here. Okay. Hi. Hey, great talk. And I'm loving that lipstick, Regina. Thank you. All right, here. A friend of mine who works in this field had to make male sound sexy. Oh, male. Okay, male. I'm sorry. Sound sexy on one job. Laugh out loud.
I know it's a crazy what people in marketing have to do, right? And you're selling all kinds of stuff, and it's amazing how complicated things that feel so simple are. There's a lot of science that goes into marketing, but there's a lot of spin, as you pointed out, Sally, and it's kind of bananas when you think about how much selling happens in the world and how inundated we are with messages about all kinds of products that we never knew that we needed.
Well, you touched on having female bosses in your life, right? And I got some statistics. It said the higher up the corporate ladder, the fewer women. Right? It said executives are 23%, senior managers are 29%, managers are 37%, professionals are 42%, support staff is 47%. On a 2020 analysis by Mercer, over 1,100 organizations across the world found a leaky pipeline for women in leadership. What do you think about that?
It's true. I think it's true. I think it's true. And the other thing that you'll hear a lot about, and I'm sure you've seen it, Regina, is that women across all levels were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic too.
Yes.
Right? You saw more women leaving the workforce in the pandemic because of the fact that women do a disproportionate amount of the home, making sure everything's okay at home too, making sure kids are taken care of, right? And the kind of failure of some of those social nets, like being able to send your kids to school, the reality is a lot of women had to, right? It wasn't necessarily a choice, let's be honest too. I mean, some people did choose to leave, but in many cases it was driven by situations that were just not manageable, and women took a disproportionate amount of the burden on in the pandemic. And that's true. That was true of, you saw that at leadership levels, and you saw that, in entry level positions as well. And so I think it'll be really interesting as we come out of the pandemic. We were already in a hole. I think we're in a deeper hole now. And I do think it's why you're seeing a lot of efforts that are really focused on getting women back to work, because it is good for women. It's good for families. It's good for communities when women are contributing at a higher level. And it's and it's also good for us as a society because women are good leaders and women bring a perspective, you know, in a lot of roles. And we've seen a lot of transformational change driven by having women leaders in some of those senior roles. There are not enough of them. And building that pipeline and making sure, you know, I think we've all seen the quotes. One of my favorite is, you know, the surest sign of a successful woman is the tribe of women who have her back.
Yes.
You know, none of us have gotten here on our own. Every single job, I mean, the last 3 jobs I got before Henry Ford were all jobs that I got through networking through women that I'd worked for or with before, right? Because women tend to look out for women. Women will be the first to be like, oh, I know this person. You got to talk to them, right? And I don't know about you, but I feel like that happens all the time with my, you know, women colleagues. And yeah, I've had a lot of great male bosses who have been very successful and healthy, but those women that I've worked for, especially at some of those pivotal points in my career, are the women who are still there pushing me ahead, you know, regardless of where I am.
I think that's awesome. So when you think about, well, let me go back a little in my mind, because you talked about women would be the first to say, hey, you know, there's a job over here. And for sure, I have definitely experienced that. But there have been experiences that when I have been in conversation with women who have felt that women spend too much time competing against one another. Yeah.
I think you see that. And I think it's driven by this idea, you know, I think women face these kind of double-edged. It's being a female in a leadership role is kind of a double-edged sword, right? Because part of you is driven as you want to be aggressive, right? You want to be able to hold your own, and especially if you're in a room or in an industry that's very male-dominated, right? You feel like you have to work extra hard to have your voice heard. But the reality is that there are still these, and that means being competitive, right? And it means competing against men, but it also in many cases means competing against women. But then there's this double-edged sword of, you know, if a man is aggressive, he's confident. And a man who's aggressive, you know, is in a room and he's authoritative. And a woman who is aggressive in a room is lots of words that I wouldn't say on this podcast with you, Regina. I mean, if we're going to be perfectly candid, you know, and you know, throughout my career, I'm a really passionate person. I actually wear that as a badge, but I've also found that there are people who use passionate as code sometimes for, you know, what they really want to say, which is you're aggressive and you need to back down a little bit, you know? And so I do think that those are the challenges that you have as women, is navigating that, like really wanting to go for it and feeling like you have to embrace it. But how do you do it in a way that is constructive and does bring people along with you and does recognize the responsibility that comes with leadership? And I think when I think about, you know, how I've worked to support other women and create opportunities for women, part of that is the responsibility I feel, and frankly, the gratitude I feel towards the women who have done that for me.
That is really awesome. I read, well, I was listening. I do a lot of listening to books, and I was listening to A Promised Land. And President Obama, I guess Val, came in his office one day and really spoke to him about how when the men were saying something in the room, you know, they were great ideas. And when the women would say something in a room who were just as equal as them, they would be shot down immediately. And she felt like he was being a part of this. I thought that was just so powerful that she could tell him, you're co-signing this. And what I have found in my environments, like the church, I have found in my work environment, I've been in mental health, is that sometimes, Heather, women can co-sign the behavior right along with men. I mean, just even looking at the elections, right? So I love the way you said we have to navigate that. We have to understand, really, it goes back to our values and purpose, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so. And, like I said, I feel like, especially, Henry Ford is a good example of a really diverse executive leadership team. And what you find when you do have diversity in your leadership, and in diversity in gender, diversity in race, diversity in background, diversity in experience, is that the conversation you have is richer. And what you don't have is you don't have anybody dominating, right? Because if you have really diverse worksheets, then nobody is, then you have, lots of representation, and you don't get those lopsided points of view. Because you are more appreciative of the diversity of experience and expertise that people are bringing to the room. And so I think that's why when you think about big D diversity, right, which is so beyond, checking boxes, it's really looking at the mix up and the cultural dynamics of your teams. That's why diversity is so important, right? Because there's not winners and losers. You're creating a richer tapestry of opinions, and it doesn't hopefully lead to those kind of lopsided dynamics that you see when you have women fighting for voice, or a person of color fighting for voice in a room, because you have so much more of a interwoven cultural fabric that's driving those pivotal conversations.
I love that. Here, I'm going to look at it's so true in corporate. That is why women are starting to own their own businesses. Okay, I may have missed a comment, Deborah. I should have brought it out a little sooner. Did Are you relating to this statement? I know I may have missed it.
Well, I mean, I think it's when we were talking about, people dropping out, right? And the
Okay,
reality
yes,
of
yeah.
we create these places where people can't succeed. And I do think that the kind of shift towards women-owned businesses and women really being able to chart their own path, in some cases it's sad because it has been, in some cases it may be driven by people who are in dynamics where they can't succeed in other places, but in other places it's just about women owning their vision, right? And owning
Yes.
their values and really going for it. And so I think women-owned businesses and investing in them, in making sure that we're advancing them and championing them, is critically important in even influencing things like the diversity of voices in corporate America, right? Because
Yes.
so many of those entrepreneurial women are the leaders of the future, either of their own businesses or do end up, really significantly influencing corporate cultures. So it is a huge bravo, and I think what we have to do is make sure that banks are giving them loans, right?
Yeah, right.
Getting the marketing support, right? So it's that how are these institutions that are so critical to the success of small businesses also recognizing the great opportunity that women are bringing with more women-owned businesses across all different kinds of sectors and industries.
And that is really true. And even when you think about that, would you connect that to health as well as, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I mean, absolutely. And we talk a lot. I think one of the reasons why I was excited to come to Henry Ford is I feel like health is seen so much. Health is so much broader than what happens in a physician's office or what happens in a hospital, right? When we think about the health of our communities and the role that healthcare institutions can play, it has to extend outside of the four walls of the hospital. We talk
Yes.
about this idea of shifting from the where to the care. And in order to support, the where is where it's always happened, to the
Yes.
care is how are we creating these networks, dynamic networks of community programs and leadership and opportunities that actually makes a healthier community. And it's that connection between successful communities that are thriving and growing and what that means for the personal health of the people who live there. And you have to look at both. And women in leadership roles, in particular in our communities, like you said, in faith-based institutions, in education, women in many of these structures that are so important in helping people live healthier, more successful lives, women have incredible influence. And women need to be empowered to continue to make their voice heard, to advocate on behalf of their communities and make change happen. I mean, we were talking about politics. I don't care, the power of Stacey Abrams in, Georgia, whether you agree with what her or not politically, no one can underestimate what that woman was able to do through her networks, right? And the networks that she built across that state. And they were networks that were dominated by women, right? Like that's how she got women to, how we got women to go to the polls. That's how you make change happen. That's how you advocate for policies and for programs that are important in making communities healthy and strong. And healthcare institutions like Henry Ford have an important partnership and role to play in that, but we have to recognize the role that women play in making that change possible.
Yes, for sure. And when you had mentioned how women have been hit the most by the pandemic and having to, leave their jobs, that is huge, because particularly when you think about Detroit, right?
Yeah.
Because 80% of households in Detroit are headed by single mothers.
Yeah.
So when you hear people saying things like, well, people don't want to go back to work because they're getting that money, I scoff at that, because that's nothing what they're getting. They're having to choose between, because a lot of childcare places closed.
Yes.
Yes.
It was not a choice, right?
It was not.
I get very frustrated with this. Well, everybody just dropped out. Like nobody chose for this to happen.
Right.
And people had to react to it in a huge variety of ways.
Huge variety, yes.
Like I can't imagine, I can't imagine having 3 kids at home, right, who are trying to do school when you're trying to do a job. And by the way, a lot of women are in jobs where they're not going to an office, right? They're going to a retail location, or they're, doing jobs where they can't call in sick and they can't stay home to help their 6-year-old on the computer. Like that was not a choice, right? So I agree with you 100%. And I think we need to recognize that. And our failure to, and what the pandemic did in terms of the impact on people of color and the impact on women, was it shined a spotlight on things that have been around for a long time. The lack of access to reliable and affordable childcare, the before and after school programs. I mean, look at everything we had to do to scramble with meals for kids and things like that. Those are not new problems.
Those are not new problems, right?
But the reality is they were things that we saw, and shame on us, though, if we say we just want to go back to how it was before. Because those problems that challenged women, and in particular women of color, are still there. Even if you're going back to work and your kids are still going back to school. So I just think it is why it is so, we're at I feel like we're at a time of reckoning, right? When we think about how we're going to get to the other side of the pandemic, of saying, if we fail to reflect on what this taught us, if we fail to learn from this about our relationships with what matters to us and how we support it, and to the conversation where we started about how our values, help influence, what we do and why we do it, then that would be such a shame, right? Because there will be other pandemics, maybe not a health pandemic, but the reality is vulnerable communities and populations are going to get hit again, and it needs to be the push, right? And it should be a wake-up call for all of us. And I think it's particularly true when we think about women and women of color.
Yes, most definitely. And thank you for even saying that. And that goes back to one of the words, right, that I got from your bio was empathy. And also hearing you say, here, Tanya Maddox said yes. So she in total agreement. Thank you, Tanya, for being here. Just what you were saying about communities having to wrap their arms, corporations having to wrap their arms around the communities. It's not an isolated situation. It's not that it impacted you and that's you, even though you may not feel what I've had to go through because of the income or whatever you're making. it's still impactful, particularly if you are owning companies, if you own like even health system, if you're a part of mental health, because people are not only, they're not able to show up for work, they're not able to go on trips, they're not able to take advantage of things that maybe they were able to do prior.
Yeah.
So it is impactful, and it's not you against us. It's
No,
not.
no,
Yeah.
I mean, I do think that it was, in many ways, we are at this crossroads. I mean, I think
Yes.
as a nation and as communities of, you know, are we going to go forward on our own, or are we going to go forward together? Right.
Yeah.
And so many of these issues that you're talking about are deeply rooted in highly personal, value-based decisions.
Yes.
But the reality of what makes communities resilient is this dedication to we're going to move forward together. And ultimately we need to figure out what are the things that do unify us, that we're willing to do together. And I think the pandemic was hard. There were things that people unified behind, right? Support for
Yes.
healthcare workers and
Yes.
responders, and that was so great to see.
Yes.
Um, but again, like that happens, and then people have to get back to the reality of their daily lives. And so we have to be able to make the connection between the things that we need to do to make ourselves stronger as a community, and the fact that that does make our personal lives better. And I think that's where there's so much opportunity for healthcare institutions, for companies, who are willing to take a stand. And I think we've seen more and more of that. And I just hope that it has that staying power. That I think only in that will we really see some change.
Yeah. Well, let me just ask you, what is one thing that you feel that could help with that change? That one thing that if we came together, that it would help us as a community and corporations all over. Maybe it can even, can have that global, because it can have that rippling effect.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting that you talked about empathy, because empathy is not easy, right? Empathy is hard. You have to be able to step out of your experience, and in some cases, it's like, you need to walk in someone else's shoes. But before you can walk in someone else's shoes, you have to stoop down and put them on, right? And
Okay.
so I think that takes work. And so people have to see
Yes.
the value in being empathetic and be able and willing to put in the time. And then when you've done it, or and it's a daily thing, right? It's not like all of a sudden I'm an empath, like all of a sudden
Right.
I'm empathetic. Oh, I get you now, right? I
Yes.
think it's about a level of consciousness and connection that's been broken down. So my hope as we come out of the pandemic is people continue to think about why connection is important, right? And connection
Yes.
breeds empathy. Why those things that they lost, that conversation. When I lived here, we moved into our house, and I went 6 months before I met a neighbor. You know
Wow.
what it's like I mean, like I literally have never, I
Yeah.
hadn't even seen anybody come out of the house. We have an older
Wow.
couple that lives next door to us. They didn't leave the house. So
Right. Yes.
I didn't even know who lived there. I didn't know what they looked like, and then
Wow.
all of a sudden now people are having conversations again,
Yes.
and like, remember why connection matters. Remember why you care about people. If not for them, then what it does for you, right?
What
Which
it
makes
does for
you whole and
you.
is sustaining. And so that connection is what breeds empathy. So we need to continue to foster connection. And there's so much in our culture that actually breeds disconnection, right? Technology and people focusing
Yes.
on their phones and, all of these things that, yes, in some ways make life easier, but in some ways makes life more distant and more lonely. And I think this value on connection breeds community. It creates the sandbox for empathy to come about, and for people to start to play in other people's spaces in a way that helps you learn and grow.
Yeah, I love that. Um, yeah, and you have to be strategic about that, right? All
And it
right.
takes work, right? You have to be
Yes.
willing to leave your house, right? You have to be willing
Yes.
to go there, right? You have to be the one
Yes.
who's willing to, like, look over the fence and be like, hey, neighbor, and sometimes I think in the pandemic, it was easier to retreat, and we were forced to.
Yeah.
But how do we get people who are more willing to put themselves out there? And, I think it's hard work, but it's the value in it. And I think why you saw people just so, as things started to open up, to start to make those connections, is hopefully we remember that value of those connections.
Yes, I know being in mental health, uh, when people would request to see counselors in person,
Mm-hmm.
that was really scary. It was like, no, but they were willing to risk it because mental health can be so isolating anyway. You're already dealing with so much with mental health. And so to have to deal with one more thing that isolates you, that disconnect you, is very difficult to deal with. And so, yeah, a lot happened, whether people realize it or not, with people mental health. A lot happened, you know.
I don't think I don't even think we fully realized, and we
Yes.
won't for a long time, Regina, like
Yeah.
impact it's had on people's mental health, right?
Yes.
And again, people who were vulnerable anyways lost their
Yes.
safety net, and people who didn't understand or didn't realize that they were vulnerable all of a sudden, were very alone. And I'm encouraged by the conversations that are happening about mental health. The Simone Biles at the Olympics, of her really owning,
Yes.
prioritizing her mental health, I think is the kind of conversation that will influence a generation in ways that we won't realize for a while.
Yes.
But I think that the long-term implications of the pandemic and some of the other disconnection that's happening right now, we won't understand for a while, and it makes me sad. It makes me a little scared, but I hope that it does breed this idea of, at the very most foundational level, you need to prioritize yourself. Right? And that's something that's
Yes.
hard, in particular for women, in particular for women who are in high profile situations. Poor Simone Biles, I have no idea how she
Yes.
did anything she did, but her owning her experience and her honesty about why she was making the decisions she did. I'll tell you, I have a 15-year-old daughter who, like, Simone Biles is a hero. And
Yes.
she's not just a strong woman, she's a strong woman who owned her vulnerability. And that's, those kinds of conversations must happen, absolutely must happen. And it is life and death. It's interesting because we talk about COVID, and we talk about the, hundreds of thousands of people who have died from COVID. There are thousands and thousands of people who died from COVID byproducts, and what we saw in the mental health space is a really good example of numbers where the toll from COVID, I don't even think we've realized.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
When you mention empathy, the other side of empathy is shame, right? And when you talked about Simone Biles, and there were. I'm so happy that she embraced who she was and she found that support. But of course, you're gonna always have the naysayers and try to shame her into doing what they believe that she should have been doing.
Yeah.
And so, shame is definitely internal. It's about how you're feeling about yourself. It has nothing to do with anybody. And to watch her stand up against it, that was so empowering for me. But women deal with shame all the time, something that we don't really want to talk about. So, how have you dealt with that in your community, with parenting, with stepping out into a space where there's more men, than women? How has how have you been, shame resilient dealing with it?
Yeah, I don't know how shame resilient I've been. I mean, like, you have to do your experiences to be honest about your experience, right? And I don't think that I'm shame resilient. I mean, every time you make a decision, you're weighing trade-offs, right? And even when you make a decision, you may own it, but there's still something that you're prioritizing, right? Making a choice is about prioritizing one thing over another in that instance. And I think that's really hard for women because and at least for me, like I'm a pleaser. Like I like people to like me and I want to make people happy. And that's how I live my life. And if I'm making choices where somebody is not happy,
okay,
I don't like that. That makes me feel bad. And so I think part of it is we need to own our decisions. But I think the more important thing is that we need to give ourselves grace. And we have to realize that we're not going to please everybody all the time. And decisions are hard. And we have to come to terms with and give ourselves some grace. And it doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt you or doesn't impact you or you don't think about it, right? Like I said, we make decisions all the time that, that I have to do this meeting instead of going to my, daughter's concert or, and those aren't easy decisions. But when I try to look at them from two things. One, I try to create some perspective because sometimes it's hard when you're in the moment and you're feeling that tinge of guilt or pain to see beyond that how you feel in that moment. And, there have been times when I've had to make choices that have impacted people. And my kids are the hardest thing. I think as working moms, we make decisions all the time about trade-offs. And sometimes our kids are not the ones who in that moment, are the ones who are benefiting. But what I also look back with a lot of pride on the fact that my daughter, has a strong mom who is a senior executive that she looks up to, and that I've modeled a path for her through some decisions that she now sees paving the way for where she wants to go, and so I think that perspective and grace are the things that can help us not eliminate guilt and shame, but manage it in a way that it doesn't become derailing or debilitating or minimize our sense of empowerment to make those decisions in the first place.
I love that because you don't shoo it away, do you?
Yeah.
No, you have to manage it. Yes. And then accepting, what the future is going to hold for your daughter. And how have other women, because I think about when I was growing up, right? And my mom did not want me wearing pants to church, but the way I wanted to own my voice was, I'm wearing these pants to church, Mom. But as I got older, I realized that it wasn't about me, that it was very difficult for me to come into the church with pants on. So I started wearing dresses to church, but it was very, well, she tried to shame me, but I wasn't buying into it. So when you think about, other generations, like your mom, we talked a little bit about that. How did you overcome that?
Well, I think that, again, I do think it comes from perspective, right?
Okay.
You have to confront when these things happen, you have to have real conversations about what is this really about, right? To your point about the pants and the dress, like, is this about me or is this about the community? And then you need to make a decision together. And your mom and you would come to a point where, like, I understand that and by the way, I'm doing this for you. Right. So you should feel grateful to me
right.
it's helping your respectability. Right. Do you acknowledge that, Mom? Yes. So I think that, like, part of this is just having these conversations about what is this really about. And that's the conversation I had to have with my mom about, the fact that my mom was a teacher and my mom worked, but she took off a significant portion of time when we were little to stay home with us. And, I had a career where I was, leaving, my kids when they were little and flying, around the world and having to make those decisions. And she's like, they're so little. How can you do that? And I said, I am doing this because it's allowing, one, I like what it models for my children, right? Which is this idea of owning my future and leadership and influence and really being able to chart my path. And I think that's a good message for my kids, right? And I would rather have them have that conversation with them than mommy's leaving again. And by the way, we have very different conversations. But I think the second thing is having her understand that we just have very different experiences, and that there's a lot culturally and in our lives that have changed. It doesn't mean that I don't, value my children and value my time with them. I do incredibly. But I will tell you, the time that I'm home with my kids, especially when they were little, like that time was precious. I guarded that, and we had amazing, I made that. I sucked every ounce of life out of that, and I infused every bit of love into them that I could, in those times when we weren't together. So I think part of it was just being honest with those folks that may have a different opinion about what your perspective is. But also, I mean, I guess, Regina, like at the end of the day, you're not going to please everybody either, right? And I do think it's hard, like owning your truth and owning your experience is really hard sometimes. But, sometimes you just got to. First of all, you try to give them some perspective. But second of all, and at the end of the day, you have to own and be comfortable with your truth and your path, right?
Yes. Do you have, here's a comment. Yes, give yourself permission. Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tanya. Do you have friends in your life that help you to give that permission to yourself? Because that's important too when you talk about connection, right? Having the friends in your life that can let you off the hook and not see it from their perspective, but see it from your perspective. So do you have those friends in your life?
I do. I have a group of women, in particular that I worked with at Hyatt, and we were all kind of a peer group within a peer group. And one was the head of communications, one was the head of insights. So these were, strong senior leaders, but we were also really good friends. And we were the ones who did give ourselves a lot of perspective, right? On personal decisions, on professional decisions. Some of us were married with kids, some of us were married, some of us weren't married, right? So we had very different experiences, but collectively, we brought really unique perspectives to conversations that we had about choices that we were making and facing. And I found that to be incredibly, incredibly valuable. And I do think the diversity too, of the fact that like I said, one of these women is not married, two of them are married but don't have kids. I have kids. And so sometimes you need to get out of your world too, right? Get out of your existence with people who do look at it from a different point of view and can bring you a different perspective to it. So I think it's really important. And I think it's hard though. And it's because sometimes I don't know if you have this issue, but sometimes I find it even hard to make time for friends, right? Like when you're in life and you're just trying to get through, and at the end of the day, when you get home and you're just tired, you need something, right? Like you need to connect with somebody, you need to reach out. Sometimes it's like, I feel like sometimes picking up the phone is the hardest thing. Like I'd much rather just sit down on the couch or take a shower and call that person, even though in my heart I know that I need that support. And so I think having it be there, but also again to that point of recognizing that you need those friends, recognizing that you need that perspective, is again part of just owning your own and being honest with yourself.
I have really enjoyed this conversation immensely, because throughout you say owning your own, recognizing perspective, living in your values, valuing your time, and knowing that none of that is easy. And when you try to live it as if it's easy, you are really denying yourself, actually, because there's nothing easy about it. And I just think this conversation, hopefully, my prayer is that women would start really connecting with one another, even because there are ways now. You
Yeah.
mentioned technology. Some girlfriends and I, we connect over Zoom
Yeah.
during the time of the pandemic. I mean, there were so many Zoom parties and everything that were going on. My family and I, we connected over Zoom. And right now, when you say about community, it's one friend of mine. Her daughter has been a part of. It's four of us,
Hmm.
and actually five of us if you include the mothers too. So it's five of us all together that are coming together, and we are planning her baby shower, and we're calling it the sister circle of aunties and moms.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, and it was to pour back, to pour back into her, to let her know that she was not alone.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm really hearing you say.
I
The
think so. And I
importance.
think again, I think you're so right. And I'm so grateful for this conversation, Regina. I mean, you asked such thoughtful questions. I think I'm going to leave this conversation with my head swirling of reflecting on this and some of the amazing, issues that
Thank
you teased
you.
out in this conversation. But I do think that that's what it is. And I just think, again, I do think it's about owning yourself and being honest with yourself and owning your decisions. But I can't stress enough to Tanya's point on permission of giving yourself grace too. And
Yes.
also owning your vulnerability. Like there's no shame in that. When we talk about shame, right? There's no shame
Yes.
in being
No shame.
vulnerable. That's being human, right?
Yes, yes, yes. Even though in listening to Brene Brown book, that vulnerability has been put in the shame category, and
Mhm.
it's up to us as women, uh, to those who really want to practice shame resilience, to say no. It's okay for me to be vulnerable. So she tells a story of her mother crying because her brother was killed in this bad accident, and then the grandmother just checked out,
Mhm.
and so her mother started crying, and Renee and her sister associated as weak, and then her mother told her, no, if I was weak, I'll be dead. No, this is actually good that I'm crying because I'm letting it go. And she said that changed the trajectory for her,
Yeah.
that her mother became one of the strongest women ever for her. I thought that was powerful.
I think it's awesome. I also think vulnerability is really important for leaders. And it feels like it should be a contradiction, but I actually think vulnerability forges connection, and connection is critical in getting things done, right? And
Yes.
getting it done well. And so I think recognizing that is so important. It helps you connect with, your colleagues. It helps you connect with your teams. In the case of marketing or, building experiences, it helps you connect with who you want to serve. So I do think that idea of owning your truth and owning your own vulnerability equally um,
Yeah.
is really important, just in being a good human and certainly in being a good leader.
I love this. Thank you so much, Heather Geisler, for being here on Exhale with Regina. And exhale. It is 4:28. I'm so happy you were here. Exhale with Regina is really about women owning their voices, women seeing themselves. Many women do not see their gifts, talents, and abilities, and it keeps them stuck in shame, false guilt, comparison, low self-esteem, and a poor self-image. What I have really loved about what you said today, Heather, there is competition out there. I mean, we are being competitive, but we don't have to allow that to separate us. It can bring a connection. Women can struggle with embracing themselves based on societal norms, family expectation, distorted thoughts towards themselves. Women who embrace themselves see their beauty not the way society defines it. Their God-given beauty is tied to their purpose, and that's really what I've heard from you today, Heather. Is really tying to your purpose. And let me get the comments. They said, "Thank you, good conversation." Signing off. Thank you for showing up, Tanya. I really appreciate you. The way you guys can get in touch with, here, I'm going to bring this up real quick. You can go to LinkedIn. This is Heather's LinkedIn, and I'll make sure that I put it on my page, on my Enlightened Heart page, for you women to just contact Heather Geisler. And Heather, any last minute words that you may have?
No, I don't think so. But thank you so much for doing this, Regina. It's such a gift. It was a gift for me to be able to participate. It's such a gift to the folks who were able to join in this
Thank
conversation.
you.
And
Yes.
I'm really, really grateful for having the opportunity to connect with you today.
Yes, and I'm grateful that you accepted the invitation, and I'm hoping that women all over, because one of the things that I am going to do is make sure that I promote this throughout social media, because I think it was a well needed conversation.
Thank you so much, Regina.
Yes, thank you. Here, Valerie. Oh, Valerie Davis Baker. Excellent conversation. Thank you, Val. Here, I'm going to end it, but you hold on. Thank
Okay.
you, everyone, for
Thank you,
being a
everybody.
part. Take care.